What happens when a seemingly ordinary morning on The View takes an unexpected turn, leaving the entire studio holding its breath? What happens when one carefully worded question sparks a conversation so intense that even seasoned television veterans struggle to predict what will happen next? Stay with us, because this story unfolds like a Hollywood drama, filled with suspense, emotion, and unforgettable moments. Before we jump into today's story, don't forget to subscribe to Prime Spotlight, smash that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The familiar theme music echoed through the studio as the audience erupted into applause. Bright lights swept across the stage while cameras glided effortlessly into position. Every seat in the audience was occupied, and excitement filled the room. Behind the scenes, producers watched dozens of monitors, expecting another lively morning discussion. At the famous table sat the four hosts: Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, and Sara Haines. They exchanged smiles as the countdown reached its final seconds. 5, 4, 3. The red camera light illuminated. "Good morning, everyone." Whoopi greeted warmly as applause echoed throughout the studio. Joy leaned forward with her trademark grin. "We've got a wonderful guest joining us today." Sara smiled toward the audience. "She's one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses." Sunny nodded. "And someone who's never afraid to speak thoughtfully about life, family, and success." The audience applauded again as Hathaway stepped onto the stage. She waved graciously before embracing each host one by one. Her smile appeared genuine, her confidence unmistakable. She settled into her chair, thanking the audience for such a warm welcome. "It's wonderful to be here," and said. "We're so happy you came," Sara replied. For the next several minutes, everything unfolded exactly as viewers expected. The conversation centered around Ann's latest fictional film project, balancing work with family and the challenges of maintaining creativity after years in Hollywood. Whoopi asked thoughtful questions. Joy sprinkled in jokes that earned bursts of laughter from the audience. Sara kept the conversation light and engaging, and answered each question with warmth, humor, and honesty. "I've learned that success changes as you grow," and explained. "When I was younger, success meant achievement. Today, it means finding balance." The audience applauded enthusiastically. Sunny smiled. "That's beautifully said." For a brief moment, everything felt effortless. Then Sunny glanced toward a note card resting beside her mug. Her expression became noticeably more focused. Whoopi noticed the subtle change. Joy noticed it too. Even Sara shifted slightly in her chair, and quietly observed all of them. Sunny looked back up. "And, would you mind if we explored something a little deeper?" and smiled politely. "I'll do my best." The audience laughed softly. Sunny nodded. "You've spent years in the public eye. Millions admire your work, but they also see a carefully managed public image. Do you ever worry people don't really know who Anne Hathaway is?" The studio suddenly felt quieter, and paused. "That's an interesting question." Joy leaned back, sensing the conversation changing direction. Whoopi folded her hands calmly, listening carefully. Sara looked between Anne and Sunny. Sunny continued. "Sometimes audiences wonder where authenticity ends and public relations begin," and remained composed. "I think everyone has different versions of themselves." Sunny tilted her head. "What do you mean?" and answered carefully. "The version you see with family isn't the version you see at work. The version you see with lifelong friends isn't necessarily the version you see during an interview." Sara nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's true for everyone." The audience applauded lightly. Sunny smiled. "I agree, but celebrities influence millions of people. Doesn't that create a greater responsibility to be completely transparent?" Anne's smile softened. "I believe honesty and privacy can exist at the same time." Whoopi quietly observed without interrupting. Joy glanced toward the audience. No one was moving. Sunny leaned forward slightly. "But if audiences only see part of the picture," and gently interrupted. "They're seeing the part one chooses to share." The audience reacted with a quiet murmur. Sunny didn't look away. "So you believe celebrities decide what the public deserves to know?" and answered without hesitation. "I believe every human being deserves boundaries." Silence settled across the studio. Even Joy, usually ready with another joke, remained perfectly still. Whoopi finally spoke. "I think that's a conversation a lot of people can relate to," and smiled appreciatively. Sunny nodded respectfully. "But boundaries can sometimes raise questions," and looked directly at her. "Questions are healthy," Sunny responded. "And answers?" and held her gaze. They're earned, not assumed. The audience gasped softly. The producers exchanged nervous glances inside the control room. No one raised their voice. No one appeared angry. Yet every sentence carried more weight than the last. The atmosphere had changed completely, and everyone in the room could feel it. The conversation was only beginning. The silence that followed Anne's final words seemed to stretch far longer than it actually did. Around the studio, audience members exchanged curious glances, unsure whether they had just witnessed the beginning of an unforgettable conversation or the calm before an even bigger emotional storm. The applause that eventually followed was hesitant at first, then gradually filled the room. Whoopi Goldberg offered a reassuring smile. I think what we're really talking about here is something everyone wrestles with, where privacy ends and public responsibility begins. And nodded appreciatively. I couldn't agree more. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair with a playful grin. Well, that's certainly a lighter topic than celebrity gossip. The audience laughed, breaking some of the tension. For a brief moment, everyone seemed to relax. Sara Haines smiled. I actually think people forget that actors are human beings before they're public figures. And looked toward Sara. Thank you. That's exactly what I mean. Sunny Hostin listened carefully before speaking again. I don't disagree that everyone deserves privacy. But let me ask this another way. And folded her hands on the table. I'm listening. Sunny continued. When millions of people admire someone, they often look to that person for guidance. Doesn't influence come with additional accountability? And didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked across the audience, taking in the faces staring back at her. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked intensely curious. Finally, she turned back. Influence is real, and said softly. But influence doesn't erase humanity. Sunny nodded. So where's the balance? The balance, Anne replied, is remembering that admiration shouldn't become entitlement. A ripple moved through the audience. Several people applauded. Whoopi quietly observed the exchange, allowing both women the space to explain themselves. Joy glanced toward the audience again. I have a feeling everyone watching at home has picked a side already. Laughter spread through the studio. Even Anne smiled. Sunny smiled as well. Maybe. But difficult conversations aren't about choosing sides. They shouldn't be, Anne agreed. The atmosphere remained respectful, yet every question seemed to carry greater emotional weight than the last. Behind the cameras, producers watched multiple monitors. One whispered quietly, "This is becoming the interview everyone will be talking about." Another adjusted his headset. "Keep every camera rolling." Back at the table, Sara leaned forward. And, has there ever been a moment when public expectations made you question whether sharing less was actually healthier? And took a thoughtful breath. There have been many moments where I realized silence can sometimes protect what's most important. Sunny immediately followed. But silence can also leave room for assumptions. And looked directly at her. It can. So doesn't that concern you? It used to. And now I've accepted something. Sunny waited. And continued. No matter how much someone explains themselves, there will always be people who decide the ending before hearing the full story. The audience fell silent again. Joy slowly nodded. That's probably true for more people than just celebrities. And smiled. I think so. Sunny wasn't finished. I understand your point, but let me challenge it. And welcomed the challenge with a polite gesture. Please. What happens when public silence allows misinformation to grow? And answered carefully. Then you respond to facts, not every rumor. Sunny crossed her arms thoughtfully. But what if people expect more? Anne's expression became more serious. Expectations aren't always reasonable. The room grew quiet once again. Whoopi finally stepped in. I think both of you are making valid points. Sunny nodded respectfully. I'm not trying to suggest celebrities owe every detail of their lives. And smiled. I know. I'm asking whether influence creates obligations beyond personal comfort. And leaned forward for the first time. It creates opportunities. Sunny looked intrigued. What's the difference? An obligation says you must. An opportunity says you can. The audience responded with louder applause than before. Sara smiled. That's an interesting distinction. And continued. I choose to speak about the things I believe can genuinely help people. I don't believe I have to surrender every private moment to prove I'm authentic. Sunny considered the response. That's fair. The conversation softened for a few moments. Joy joked about how every family gathering eventually turns into a debate anyway. The audience laughed again. Even the producers relaxed. But only briefly. Sunny glanced down at another note card. Her expression shifted, and noticed immediately. Whoopi noticed too. Sara quietly straightened in her chair. Sunny looked back up. One last question. The audience became silent almost instantly, and offered a calm smile. Go ahead. Sunny spoke slowly. Do you ever worry that protecting your privacy might unintentionally create distance between yourself and the people who admire you most? And look thoughtful. For several long seconds, she said nothing. The silence itself became part of the conversation. Finally, she answered. I think admiration shouldn't require access. The audience watched without blinking, and continued. People connect with performances, interviews, and ideas. They don't need ownership of someone's personal life to appreciate their work. Sunny responded gently. So you believe boundaries strengthen that relationship? And nodded. I believe healthy boundaries make genuine connection possible. A wave of applause swept through the studio. Whoopi smiled. I think that's a perspective worth hearing. Sunny returned the smile. It certainly is. Although both women remained composed, everyone in the room could sense that the discussion had reached a turning point. The questions were becoming more personal, the answers more revealing, and the audience more invested with every passing minute. Some viewers would see two accomplished women engaging in an honest conversation. Others would see an intense clash of perspectives. And as the cameras slowly zoomed in once more, no one, not the audience, not the producers, and not even the hosts, could predict what the next question would unleash. A quiet murmur swept through the audience as the cameras captured every expression around the table. The atmosphere hadn't become hostile. It had become intensely focused. Every word now carried weight, and everyone in the studio seemed to realize they were witnessing one of those rare conversations where neither side wanted to win. They simply wanted to be understood. Whoopi Goldberg glanced around the table before breaking the silence. I think conversations like this matter because people rarely get to see disagreement handled respectfully. The audience applauded and smiled. I appreciate that. Sunny Hostin nodded. So do I. Joy Behar leaned forward with a grin. Let's just promise nobody flips the table. Laughter rippled through the studio, easing the tension for a moment. Even laughed. I wasn't planning on it. Sara Haines smiled warmly. Good, because we'd have a lot of explaining to do. The laughter faded, but the thoughtful mood remained. Sunny looked toward and once again. I've been listening carefully to everything you've said. And nodded. And I appreciate that. Sunny folded her hands. Then let me ask something from a different perspective. I'm listening. If someone watching this interview feels disconnected from celebrities because everything seems carefully controlled, what would you say to them? And paused longer than before. The question seemed to linger in the air. Finally, she spoke. I'd tell them not to confuse privacy with dishonesty. Sunny remained silent and continued. Every person decides what belongs to the public and what belongs to their family. Fame doesn't erase that right. Several audience members applauded. Sara quietly nodded. I think a lot of people needed to hear that. Joy added with a smile. My neighbors barely know what I'm doing half the time. The audience laughed again. Whoopi chuckled. That's probably by design. Joy shrugged playfully. Exactly. The room relaxed again. For only a moment. Sunny leaned in slightly. I agree everyone deserves boundaries. And smiled. But. Sunny smiled back. But sometimes public trust depends on openness. And answered calmly. It depends on what we're asking someone to open. Sunny tilted her head. Can you explain? And looked directly at her. If we're asking someone to share ideas, experiences, or lessons they've learned, that's one thing. Sunny listened carefully. But if we're asking someone to prove their humanity by surrendering every private part of their life. She gently shook her head. Then I think we've crossed a line. The audience responded with thoughtful applause. Whoopi watched both women carefully. I think this is where people often disagree. Sunny nodded. Exactly. And agreed. And disagreement isn't the problem. What is? The assumption that only one answer can be right. Silence filled the room once again. Backstage, producers exchanged amazed looks. One whispered, they're still completely calm. Another replied, and somehow it's getting even more compelling. Meanwhile, viewers across the country, within this fictional story, were flooding social media with reactions. Neither of them is backing down. This feels more like a debate than an interview. I can't stop watching. Back at the table, Sara looked toward Anne. Has there ever been a time when criticism made you question yourself? And smiled thoughtfully. Of course. And how did you deal with it? I learned something that took years to understand. Everyone listened. Not every opinion deserves to become your inner voice. A wave of applause echoed throughout the studio. Joy pointed playfully toward the audience. Somebody's writing that one down. Laughter followed. Sunny smiled. That's a powerful statement. And nodded. It took me a long time to believe it. Sunny hesitated before asking one final question. Can I be completely honest? And answered immediately. I hope so. Sunny took a slow breath. When I ask difficult questions, some people think I'm trying to create conflict. And listen quietly. But my goal has always been understanding. And smiled warmly. I believe you. Sunny looked genuinely surprised. You do? I do. Even after everything we've discussed? And nodded. Because difficult questions aren't the problem. Sunny waited. The problem begins when people stop listening to the answers. The audience erupted into applause. Several people stood. Whoopi smiled broadly. Now that's a conversation. Joy looked toward the audience. I think everyone in here just forgot they're watching a television show. More laughter followed. Sara glanced between Anne and Sunny. I think what's happened today is something rare. Sunny looked at her. What do you mean? We've spent nearly an hour talking about disagreement without turning it into an argument. The audience applauded again and looked around the studio. I wish more conversations worked that way. Sunny extended a hand across the table. On that, we completely agree. And reached across and shook her hand. The audience rose to its feet with a standing ovation. The cameras captured smiles, applause, and relieved expressions from every corner of the studio. It felt as though the conversation had finally reached its natural conclusion. Or so everyone believed. Because as the show prepared to head toward its closing moments, no one realized that the biggest reaction to this interview wasn't happening inside the studio. It was already exploding beyond those walls, where millions of viewers had begun debating every question, every answer, and every unforgettable moment. As the applause slowly faded, the cameras pulled back for what everyone assumed would be the final moments of the show. The atmosphere inside the studio felt completely different from when the interview had begun. There had been no shouting, no dramatic walkout, and no personal attacks. Yet the emotional intensity of the conversation had left both the audience and the hosts deep in thought. Whoopi Goldberg smiled warmly as she looked around the table. I think we've all been reminded today that some of the most memorable conversations aren't the loudest ones. The audience applauded. Joy Behar nodded with a grin. And somehow we managed to disagree without anyone throwing a coffee mug. The audience burst into laughter, breaking the tension one last time. Sara Haines smiled at Anne. Thank you for being willing to have this conversation. And returned the smile. Thank you all for asking thoughtful questions. Sunny Hostin looked directly at Anne. I appreciate your honesty today. And nodded. And I appreciate the opportunity to explain my perspective. For a brief moment, the conversation became surprisingly personal. Sunny spoke softly. I think people sometimes assume asking difficult questions means we want conflict. And answered with a calm smile. I think asking difficult questions is important. Listening carefully to the answers is just as important. Sunny nodded. I can agree with that. The audience responded with another round of applause. The show's closing music quietly began to play. Whoopi thanked the audience for joining them before the cameras slowly faded to black. Inside the control room, producers finally removed their headsets. One of them let out a long breath. I've never seen the audience so quiet. Another producer smiled. Sometimes silence says more than applause. Meanwhile, in this fictional story, the interview immediately became the biggest topic of conversation online. Within minutes, short video clips spread across social media platforms. Some viewers praised Anne's calm, thoughtful responses. Others applauded Sunny for asking challenging questions. Many admired Whoopi's steady moderation, Joy's perfectly timed humor, and Sara's balanced perspective throughout the discussion. Comment sections quickly filled with thousands of opinions. That was one of the most respectful disagreements I've ever watched. They proved you don't have to shout to make a powerful point. Everyone at that table brought something valuable to the conversation. Some viewers believed and had delivered the strongest answers. Others felt Sunny had asked exactly the questions many people were thinking. Many simply appreciated seeing intelligent discussion instead of manufactured drama. Entertainment commentators, within this fictional scenario, began analyzing every exchange, every pause, and every memorable quote from the interview. Articles debated whether Anne's statement about privacy would become one of her most talked-about interview moments. Others highlighted Sunny's thoughtful approach to asking difficult questions without turning the conversation into an argument. Even television critics praised the chemistry among Whoopi, Joy, Sunny, Sara, and Anne, describing the discussion as proof that meaningful conversations could still capture people's attention. Days later, fans were still replaying their favorite moments. Some discussed Anne's belief that admiration should never become entitlement. Others reflected on Sunny's reminder that public influence carries responsibility. Many pointed to Whoopi's steady guidance, Joy's ability to ease tension with humor, and Sara's thoughtful observations as reasons the conversation remained respectful from beginning to end. Whether viewers agreed with and Sunny, both of them, or neither, one thing was undeniable within this fictional story. The conversation encouraged people to think rather than simply choose sides. Long after the studio lights had dimmed and the audience had gone home, the discussion continued in living rooms, workplaces, classrooms, and across countless online conversations. And perhaps that became the true legacy of this imagined interview. Not who won, not who had the final word, but the reminder that respectful disagreement can sometimes be more powerful than perfect agreement. As the screen slowly faded to black, one final message appeared. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Who do you think made the strongest point in this imagined conversation? Anne Hathaway or Sunny Hostin? Or do you think both perspectives had equal value? Share your opinion in the comments below, because we'd love to read your take on this fictional scenario. And if you want more cinematic celebrity stories, dramatic what-if moments, and entertaining narratives, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Prime Spotlight, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.